Hey, good to see you. Thanks for coming. It's another episode of Wireframe, and today we're going to be talking about over-engineered simplicity. But before we get to that, a couple of updates. I did make a post on LinkedIn looking for an editor for the book. It's basically last chance to do this before I go and jump into the AI space for editing the book, which I, again, didn't really want to do, but I'm potentially going to need to do that. So if you have an editor, reach out to me for a book. Again, it's not a publisher, but an editor for a technical and design book. Definitely looking for someone who could do that for me. Next is there's a couple of events going on this week that I'm going to start off with just off the bat instead of finishing it up later. There is Vercel's Ship on Wednesday here in New York, which I will be there with a couple of other buddies of mine that I met at Ship 2 years ago, which was really cool. Then there's a Design in AI or AI in Design meetup later that night, same day over at Bloomberg. And then on Thursday, there's a design engineering meetup at Netflix in New York City as well. It's in person. So really exciting stuff. Definitely looking forward to all three of those events this week. And additionally, I'm also looking for event space because I do want to do the salon. I'm not going to talk about much of that now because, again, I'm still trying to collect stuff about that, but that's what I wanted to kind of bring up. A couple other things I wanted to bring up real quick is that I did a little bit of spec writing, not really spec writing, just the proposal writing, that's more like it, because I saw a need for a analog to match media in the JS DOM kind of ecosystem. For container queries. I saw that being really helpful, especially in some of the reflow stuff that I've done in my own system. I think that would have really helped. And also for regular APIs to have something that allows for a breakpoint to go in and manipulate something. So the idea of match container would be really good. And I was looking in the proposals and I didn't see anything for match container in there, so I made one. And then I did some more footsteps and trying to learn more about anybody who's done this, and apparently this is in the CSS working group, which seemed unexpected because it's a DOM API that we're talking about, even though it's related to CSS, but whatever. So it exists, and in fact there's even a polyfill for it that's on NPM that was made earlier this year, which I found afterwards. So anyway, if you did see that GitHub proposal thing that I linked out over the weekend, there's all the links that go to the other places in there. So definitely show your support in that stuff. All right, speaking of over the weekend, I did see this post that I'm going to show you here by Ksenia Poluchik. You'll see in a moment. I might be butchering the name, but it caught my attention because there's a lot of my colleagues in the design system practice that were interacting with it, commenting, providing some reactions to it. And it kind of goes all over the place. And I had my own opinions about it. I feel like if I was to respond to the post, it would be much longer than it really should have been. So I wanted to make a video response, which is what I'm doing right now, over on the post instead of, again, commenting here. So let's take a look at the post, and then I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to go break it down piece by piece. All right. So here's what Ksenia says. Unpopular opinion, design systems have become the new waterfall methodology. TW, I'm going to challenge the sacred cow. We've spent decades escaping rigid top-down development processes. Then we've created design systems so comprehensive that they require committee approval to change a button color. The irony is delicious. 79% of teams now have dedicated design system teams, bureaucracy score. Only 40% consider the system successful, effectiveness score. And designers complain systems limit creativity, user satisfaction score. We've recreated enterprise software development, but for ... Visual consistency, ? We're solving the wrong problem. Instead of how do we control every pixel, we should ask how do we enable good decisions at the moment of creation. Berlin Startup Reality Check. When Silicon Valley debates component versioning strategies, we're shipping features with 3-person teams using Tailwind and calling it a day. Somehow our products still look coherent. Maybe the magic wasn't in the system, it was the shared taste and judgment all along. Design leaders, am I missing something, or how have we over-engineered simplicity? All right. Going back to me here, there is a lot to unpack in this. It kind of goes in a lot of different directions, in my opinion. I understand the frustration. I want to break it down a little bit, or at least give you some of my kind of play-by-play in it. All right. First off, it talks about design systems becoming the new waterfall methodology, which is this very slow process that, like, you know, makes it really hard to iterate because you kind of like wait for something to be done more or less, or perfect, I guess, and before like going to the next thing, right? Agile is supposed to be really fast and iterative and, you know, making changes all the time. The difficulty in that for design systems is the design system is expected to be the perfect thing, the thing that everyone's meant to be using because we've done the due diligence to make sure that it is, you know, accessible, localized, performant, meets all the needs of the entire organization. There's a lot involved in there. So it makes it really hard for us to do rapid iterations on something, especially since if we put out, you know, V1 of the thing and it doesn't meet someone's needs, they're not going to use it, right? So we need to, of course, be feature complete for at least one team, if not the entire organization. And becoming feature complete is not something that you can do agilely, right? You need to actually kind of go into a corner and figure it all out properly, right? Imagine again, you know, putting out an MVP of an app that all it does is, you know, collect, I guess, your user profile. Like, what am I supposed to do with that, right? It doesn't have the stuff that I need, so why am I going to use it? It's the same kind of thing. So that's why design systems typically end up being more waterfall-like, because we're trying to take a lot of things into account and make sure that for our users, which is our peers, it's usable for them, because otherwise, again, they're not going to use our stuff. We've spent decades escaping rigid top-down development processes, and then we create design systems so comprehensive they require committee approval to change the button color. All right, so this is the thing that actually triggered me seriously, because changing the button color should be a committee approval, right? And I know what that feels like. That feels like, oh my God, you're limiting my creativity, which we'll get to. But when it comes to the way that your brand is meant to be conveyed, you don't want to confuse your users about the way that it's meant to be conveyed, right? So if in your application, from the home page all the way into the dashboard and beyond, you use a purple button, but then all of a sudden at checkout you use like an orange one, that makes the user pause, take a second, and wonder if I should trust moving forward in this because something has changed that I wasn't expecting, right? So if we want as an organization to change the button color, we should be in agreement. And that's what I always say a design system is. It's actually the agreement and all the resources that come from an agreement for the entire organization. So if someone raises their hand and says, hey, I want to change the button color, it shouldn't just be, okay, well, you can change your own buttons. I'm going to keep these buttons over here. That's not an agreement, right? If you want to make a case, bring up the case in what is effectively a committee to change the button color, because at the end of the day, colors don't solve problems. I have a blog post that's about that, because we have other problems that are much more important than trying to figure out what the button color is, okay? Now, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to the limited creativity thing. Well, actually, I guess it's the next section, because we get this all the time in design systems. Oh, the design system's limiting creativity. Oh no, blah, blah, blah. And we get all these crying faces and they, you know, eject themselves out of the system because now they could really spread their wings and do some really creative stuff. Well, the first thing is, of course, is that in many applications, we're not looking for creativity. When we get creativity, people are not getting their expectations met because they're introduced to something new that they haven't seen before and making it really hard for them to use because, again, they've never seen it before. So that's why we want to, more often than not, align with Jacob's law, saying that users have seen other sites before and now know how to use this site. Because if you don't meet those expectations, that's when you get friction, and that's when you get people who complain about your experience. But here we are, of course, complaining about, I want the button color to be this, and that's the thing that's holding me back. So that's its own problem. The second problem, of course, is the creativity limiting can be solved through what is effectively a dynamic token architecture, just like mise-en mode. So mise-en mode is advertised as allowing lots of expressions with only a few number of tokens. And whenever I see the limit creativity part, I'm like, well, it's because the system is architected in a way that makes it rigid. And there's ways of making it more flexible, but we're so used to this traditional way of doing it that causes it to be rigid. And if we change our way of thinking, we can actually get some flexibility. And then there's a third point in the limited creativity part that is in fact something I'm going to probably speak about at Converge, which is sometimes in order to get creativity, you need constraints, right? If you have a wide open canvas and can do anything, right, and be creative, well, some people have a difficulty starting with a blank canvas, right? But if you have constraints and say, okay, well, it'll only be this big, or I can only use these fonts, or I can only use these colors to convey, what I need to convey, or more importantly, solve the problem that I have in front of me, you can be really creative by, I'm not going to say thinking outside the box, but thinking within the constraints to solve the problem. Now, it is entirely possible that the design system that you're working in is too constrained. Happens all the time, right? But it takes a creative person to look at those constraints and say, look, I've exhausted all the possibilities of this working out for me. Is there anything else that we can do, right? And that's a collaborative thing. And again, that's the thing that we see all the time with the designers saying, oh, I don't want committee approval, which means I don't want to talk to anybody, right? And that's not right here. We need communication, we need collaboration in order for this stuff to work. So that's the thing that's missing in a little bit of this, right? Is that we're missing the talking part, which ends up, going back to the waterfall part, ends up being slow because you could be really fast in your own artboard and crank out something really quick and, have iterations. But when you start talking to people, that's when things slow down, right? But you do get better products and better features and better solutions when you have more minds in the room. Moving over here, saying we recreated enterprise software development, but for visual consistency. That's again relating to design systems. We're solving the wrong problem. Instead of how do we control every pixel, we should ask, how do we enable good decisions at the moment of creation? Okay. The first thing is that design systems, I don't think, are trying to control pixels. I don't think that's accurate. What they're trying to do is provide good behaviors and good practices and things like that. They're not really trying to control every pixel. In fact, the designers that are trying to escape the system, those are the people who are trying to control pixels. We don't. Ask practically any design system maintainer about what color a button is, what button should be, and they're probably going to say, I don't care. Most of them, as long as it's accessible, right? They're going to say, I don't care what color the button is. As long as it's accessible, you folks who care about what color this is, you go and agree what it should be, and we'll put it in, right? So they're not controlling pixels in that way, but they are trying to guide in proper experience behavior for accessibility, performance, all those things otherwise, okay? But we should ask, how do we enable good decisions at the moment of creation? So that's exactly what I'm talking about. We're trying to enable good decisions at the moment of them being done at that point, right? So that's what design systems are supposed to be doing. And if your system that you're working in isn't, and again, it's trying to be very controlling about, you can only do, this blue here and that red here, you need to pry a little bit more about why, right? I see that all the time, where a design system team says, "Well, this is what we agreed on," and you go ahead and you have that meme that's like Ryan Reynolds, but why, right? Why did you agree on this, right? It's not enough to just agree in some of these things, especially when it comes to like a behavioral thing, right? When it's a color, I don't care about it. It's the same kind of conversation I have with folks. Okay, colors have a good time, but when it comes to the experience of the whole thing, that's where you have to push back if it's not working out. So yeah, that's what I wanted to leave there. And then a couple of other things in here. Yes, the tailwind part. So Silicon Valley is debating component version strategies, and we're shipping 3-person teams using Tailwind and calling it a day. And somehow the products look coherent. Okay, here's the thing. I don't know if you know this or not, but Tailwind is technically a design system. And this goes back to a little bit of my epiphany about what a design system is. Design system is just a agreed upon set of resources. In comparison to a component library, which is like just a mess of stuff that's not coherent across its resources. It's just a bucket of junk, right? With no ideas or concepts about how everything works together. It's just, here's some components, good luck, Godspeed. Tailwind, I know it's weird for me to say this, but Tailwind is doing a much better job at looking at the entire ecosystem of its resources and saying how everything works together, and making sure that it works together nicely. That means it's a system. Whether or not it's the system that you want or don't want or whatever, that's the reason why it's working for you. It's because it's a system. And that system is all meant to look, and work together and look cohesive when you use it. That's why the products still look coherent. It's because you're using a system. Whether or not it's the system that you're expected to be using under your organization or not, right? Because the folks at Tailwind, they don't have additional opinions that are trying to come in from the sides and like influence, okay, the brand needs to look like this, brand needs to look like that. That's not what's happening there. There was a very small, I guess, team that basically says, no, this is what we're going to provide. There's a lot of options in what we're going to provide. Again, there's no individual brand that it's trying to convey, but it needs to give those options, but they're all consistent options that are meant to look the same together. So an organization can take Tailwind and take parts of it out with the trust that it all works together, no matter what you pick out of it. That's why it's consistent. Goes on to say, maybe the magic wasn't in the system, it was the shared taste and judgment all along. Yes. I mean, again, it's the agreement part of the system that I now hold dear, right? If we are agreeing on everything, the resources come out of that agreement, and then we can, share those resources together. Finally, have we over-engineered simplicity? The answer is yes, except that what we're trying to capture is humans agreeing. That's not simple. It's not simple. So we are trying to capture humans agreeing, which the result might be something that looks simple, or, as an individual, certainly your decision is super simple, right? Because it captures your needs. But to get an agreement, that ends up being really hard. And that's where the over-engineering comes in often, right? Going all the way back to what I was talking about earlier, where we provide, lots of tokens to people, which ends up being really bloated and hard to manage and maintain and curate. And then we have to make more because of these certain exceptions that come up because this is what another team did, and I wasn't, didn't have the opportunity to think of another direction for this. So, add more tech debt. So that's why it looks like it's over-engineered, because we don't have the resources typically to stop and think about how this could be done better, because we're just trying to catch up with the tech debt that we had before, or the ask that we had last week, or some marketer that bursts in the door and says, I need Valentine's Day tokens to, support this one page that'll be down in 2 weeks anyway. It makes it really hard. But again, that's a lot of the reason why I've dedicated a lot of my time into things like Mise-en mode that are meant to support everyone by also simplifying things. But in order to simplify, you need to sometimes change your way of thinking. I mean, I also bring this all the way back to responsive design. Some people may not remember, but what we had to do before responsive design is we would make 2 different sites. We would make a desktop site and a mobile site. 2 different sites, right? And it would be more maintainable for us to have a single site that would respond between them, right? It's the same content. So all we need to do is make sure that it fits in all these different device sizes. And we can have one collection of content that's just styled differently between devices. I mean, it's interesting for us to think about now, like, of course, duh, right? That's what we should be doing. But back then, it wasn't thought of until later on. So it's the same kind of thing. All you kind of need is a little bit of a spark and a lot of popularity of a solution to find something that's really going to be more flexible. But to do responsive design, you have to think differently. It's not just put the artboard on the web page. It's how does the artboard get interpreted into a web page? And that takes some skill. So maybe that's something that AI is not going to take from us. Maybe, who knows? That's its own wild and crazy adventure. But past that, that's what I wanted to talk about today, was this post. Again, I think there's a lot of empathy in the post. There's a lot of passion in that post. And of course, it triggered me a little bit in order to make this kind of response for it. So hopefully that's helpful to kind of see the lay of the land a little bit. And yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today. I do have something already lined up to talk about tomorrow because Nathan Curtis posted another Medium article and I have thoughts. So looking forward to chatting tomorrow about that one for sure. That'll be on Tuesday before I go. There will be no Wireframe on Wednesday or Thursday this week because I'll be out. But looking forward to seeing you on other times of the week. And hope you had a good time listening. If you have any comments, make sure you play nice below. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.